Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin, the CEO of FIDIC, and welcome to the FIDIC First 2022 webinar program. Wherever you are around the world, I hope you are keeping safe. It's good to have you on board joining us in this conversation. The topic for today is using design thinking to increase diversity and inclusion in what we do as an industry. I'm delighted once again to be with you today. We've had a gap of nearly 2 months of proper planning within FIDIC to make sure the rest of this year program is very much on point. And I'm delighted that we're starting this year program with diversity and inclusion. Before we move into the main session, obviously last year and the year before, we spent considerable amount of our time dealing with the challenges of COVID-19, or should I call it the pandemic. And we dealt with that as best as we can. We kept our audience and our stakeholder heavily involved with what we did throughout the 2 years. I think the record stands for itself on what we achieved. And we are moving into a new dynamics where we feel the vaccination is gradually getting through different parts of the world. We thank God for that. And it still challenges some parts of the world that they haven't got the vaccination at the level they should have it. And we pray that they will get the vaccination through one means or the other in time so that they can be protected. But the world is ever so dynamic. As we come out of COVID, we thought at least the world can look forward to a better one. What do we have? We have, the war in Ukraine. And this is a real challenge for us, for the whole of the industry. At this point in time, on behalf of FIDIC board, I want to express, our sympathy to our colleague in association in Ukraine for the challenges they are facing and the impact of the Russian intervention in that particular country. It is very sad that we have this situation when the world has gone through major suffering for 2 years, and as we are coming out of it, to have a country that is well established to suffer from what is happening by the Russian army is just unacceptable. And it's not the way, and it's contrary to the philosophy of FIDIC principle. So we are praying for those people who are in Ukraine and those who are being affected by the Russian intervention in those countries. We're also praying for those countries around there that they can help to alleviate the challenges that the Ukrainians are facing. Our hearts are with them, and we continue to pray with them. I know that there are challenges in different parts of the world, and one may ask the question, what is different about this? This is different in the sense that we can see the impact, which is vivid. A lot of infrastructure is being damaged. A lot of people have been damaged. People are being killed unnecessarily, which is not acceptable. And we continue to pray for them for good resolution to the issue. But coming back today, which is important, the subject of diversity and inclusion is something that is on the headline for everybody. We have, through FIDIC, taken a very proactive role. And the topic that's been chosen is actually carefully designed by those who are in the diversity and inclusion. Because some of you will probably know a few years back when I came into FIDIC, we were talking about lack of diversity within our board. We talk about lack of diversity within our committee. We talk about lack of diversity in what we do. And you would have seen the evidence of that in the last 2 years where we completely revamp our committee and make sure it is diverse, both in terms of gender and geography. You would have seen the constant advocacy that we put in place to make sure the FIDIC board is diverse, both in terms of gender and geography. We put in our corporate plan that by 2024, we want to have 33% of our member of the board to be female. Well, I can report to you by 2021, we have achieved that goal. Now, the topic is about designing into diversity and inclusion. That's one classic evidence where there's a proactive approach that we want to see an output that gives us that transformation from the old way of thinking into new way of thinking. And without further ado, I am going to invite James Mwangi, who is our board member, to say a few words about the subject. And then after that, I will introduce the panel chair and other people who's going to support. So James, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nelson. It's a pleasure to join you in this very important webinar. Apologies for a little technical hitch that I had. Engineers have traditionally been known to be enthusiastic in coming up with designs to offer solutions that in their mind they think is suited for the user. As the world has developed, as society has developed, as society has increased in terms of numbers, we have found ourselves having to accommodate more and more people with special characteristics and needs. As democracy has evolved, as the need for people to feel included in society, it has slowly been catching up in as far as those people wanting to be included in the solutions. Many a times, the engineer is able to do his engineering and come up with solutions, but socially, the human aspects are not fully captured. And just like is done at the time a project is conceptualized or just after it is conceptualized, the need for stakeholder consultations, etc., and in particular, anybody who will be
I think we may have some challenges with James. I'm not quite sure how that's going to move forward. James, are you still with us?
Can you?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can
yes,
you hear
please.
Me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So just saying that we have known that in the project development phases, we have the environmental impact assessments done early after conceptualization of the project, where we pick up views of different stakeholders to the project. Now, in particular,
is it just me, or have we lost James again?
We have lost James again.
Okay.
Dr. Nelson, maybe
Right.
I can start with my introduction. Until
Please. Okay. Yeah. Can you step in then, Michelle, and then we'll bring James in back later on. Thank you.
No problem. So welcome everyone to our Diversity and Inclusion webinar. And it's such an amazing honor to be able to say to you on the same day, Happy International Women's Day. We're very honored to have you. We're very honored that you're spending this very important day with us in this webinar. That's really appreciated. And I really hope that at the end of this webinar, we'll have come together with a plan. We're using our inherent talents as engineers and consultants to do problem solving. So the session content, as engineers, we're very good at design thinking. But how can design thinking be used to drive diversity and inclusion? It doesn't have to be that difficult. We know that diversity increases innovation, productivity, and profitability. So how can this be used to support the consulting engineering sector post-pandemic and now possibly post-war, where the rapid changes we implement will outlast the virus or the war that caused them? So we hope that in this session, you will learn about an integrated design approach and design processes that create flexible, very important, flexible diversity and inclusion solutions that are both fit for purpose and relevant to local conditions. And you'll hear more about this later. We need diverse inputs in the design of engineering solutions to achieve sustainability, resilience, maintainability, and circular economy. These are aspects we talk about every day. These are aspects that are even included in the pillars of FIDIC as well. So these are not aspects that we are unfamiliar with. So diverse and inclusive design will come from a diverse and inclusive profession, right? So that will drive growth in our sector and in a post-pandemic era. By leveraging the speed of change, which is the new normal concept, we are now used to things happening extremely fast. The change is coming at us from all angles, and even the Ukraine war included. So this new normal concept, us being extremely resilient, we have a concept of real and collaborative diversity and inclusion. So this will become the way we set ourselves apart from the rest. The result will not only be improved profitability and productivity, which is what we've been talking about for the previous years, but it will always also have an improved result. We need to broaden the road to recovery. So this is a recovery across the board. And I'm going to give credit where these words are coming from now. The recovery of me, the recovery of us, and the recovery of the planet. So what we're saying is the inclusion and diversity works together with sustainability for us to recover from the pandemic and everything else. So I want to give credit to architect Lisa Bates from B&H. She was going to be a speaker at the webinar, but as we changed the date to today, to International Women's Day, she was unable to join us. So I just want to give credit again to Lisa. So a quick discussion around our policy. I'm extremely proud to let you know that we've published our diversity and inclusion policy from FIDIC. Maybe a couple of steps around that. It was quite a long policy document to reflect, you know, the different policy documents that you're already familiar with when it comes to FIDIC. And from there, what we did is we shortened it to say, what are the important aspects that need to be included, but that will still hold the attention of the reader. So the topics that we wanted to make sure that we cover is, what does research show us? Companies that embrace diversity and inclusion outperform their peers. Very, very important. And the gravity of this aspect is then discussed further in the policy document. In there, you'll also see a Venn diagram describing how we as FIDIC, we're looking into the mirror, how we collectively raising the bar regionally and delivering on the promise of projects. So it's not just one aspect that the policy covers, it's many aspects. And as you'll see in the policy document, as these circles in the Venn diagram overlap, what are we looking at? We're looking as FIDIC as leading. We want to inspire, we want to involve, and at the end of the day, all of those overcross each other under evolve. We need to evolve, and that's what inclusivity and diversion does. Next aspect is we wanted to break the policy up in a couple of themes that you can then take locally or regionally into your policy of your company. So first aspect that we discuss further is gender equality. So that's maybe a more obvious one. Ethnic aspects. So here we include racial discrimination, ethnic or tribal group, ethnic minority, implicit bias, and inclusion. Next aspect, very important, religious aspects. Focus point, education and diversity of staff and skills, very important, and it comes back into the design of engineering problems as well. The more diverse your staff, the bigger the success of a project. Engagement of diverse groups in the FIDIC board and other committees. Nelson's already alluded to that. Employment, including salary, training, and skills. Social return on investment. Social behavior. And at the end of the day, for each of these aspects, we make a FIDIC recommendation. And as a minimum, this should involve, and then there are bullets underneath each of those. So this gives you a good idea of how we're recommending as FIDIC, some aspects that you can include into your own HR policies, or if you want to have then a separate diversity and inclusion policy. So without giving too much away on the policy, I'll stop there. I'm asking the FIDIC team in the background, please can you post a link to the policy for the team for further scrutiny by our attendees. Thank you very much. Okay, so first up, I'm going to come back to James. So up to now, James was speaking to you as a FIDIC board member, and now he'll be speaking to you as James, the CEO of a company. So I'm quickly just going to read his biography. So James is the CEO of Current Technologies, a leading consulting firm that serves East and Central Africa. He has a BSc in mechanical engineering from the University of Nairobi. He's a registered consulting engineer with Engineers Board of Kenya and over 37 years of experience in energy and oil and gas. He's a board member of FIDIC, as you now know, and he's also a fellow with the Institute of Engineers for Kenya. He's the immediate past chair and member of Executive Committee for FIDIC Africa. He's also a board member of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, a director of Petroleum Institute of East Africa, member of the East Africa Branch Council of the International Project Finance Institution, and a member of the Energy Institute. He's a past chairman of the Association of Consulting Engineers Kenya and has a membership in other professional bodies in Kenya internationally. So welcome back as CEO, James. What we would like from you, beyond the comments that you made earlier, I think we've just lost James. We'll come back to him. Our next panelist we have is Elisa. So Elisa, sorry, we're sooner on to you than we expected. Hopefully we'll get James back on board. Elisa is an architect and urban planner with a PhD in urban regeneration, working as international consultant in urban development for multilateral development agencies, local governments, municipalities, and NGOs. She specialized in integrated urban development, slum upgrading, regional and urban planning, public spaces renovation, participatory design, with work experience in more than 20 countries across Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Since 2010, she chairs the Italian NPO aimed to reactivate abandoned public spaces and develop processes of urban regeneration and social inclusion through participatory design, communities, engagement, and education. So very relevant to the discussion. In 2015, she was awarded by the President of the Republic of Italy for her commitment demonstrated in the social and professional sectors of the Italian female society. In 2018, she received the WEF Global Award for Exceptional Women of Excellence and the EFCA Young Professional Award. Elisa is currently an active member of EFCA, the Green Deal Committee, and the FIDIC Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Thank you so much, Elisa.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you, Nelson, and thank you, FIDIC, for this invitation. As Michelle mentioned, we need an integrated design approach to deal with a complex reality and call it new normal. We need to evolve as professionals, to interact, to be flexible, to be problem solver. And as Dr. Nelson said, we need to think differently. But how to do it in practice? Today, I'm happy to share with you a little bit of my experience in applying design thinking in the context of the project I carry out as an international urban development consultant. In order to deal with complex urban planning projects that involve a multiplicity of actors and issues at multiple levels, it is necessary for me to adopt a strategic, creative, and iterative approach and understand that the outcome of each project lies in its processes and in the interaction between actors. Among the various strategic approaches that we can use, the one I use most are exactly design thinking for team management and participatory planning for stakeholder engagement. I use design thinking to harmonize the diversity because diversity is key in each project. So by using design thinking, I can harmonize diversity of team components I coordinate, which is fundamental for me because I always work with multi-ethnic, multidisciplinary, and multi-generational teams. What I've realized through my experience in the fields over the last decade, 15 years, and what I want to share with you is that all these processes, in order for them to be effective and to value diversity and inclusion, a balanced system of three fundamental elements must be built: effective communication, accountability, and actions. Communication is fundamental in practice, okay? Communication understood as a system that allows information and ideas to be exchanged in a fluid, coherent, creative, practical, and inclusive manner. Accountability in the sense of defining roles and involvement in the processes, of activating team members and respecting deadlines. Actions understood as the application of skills in the appropriate way in response to the needs of the projects and to mutual support. Each time I start a project in practice, I try to study these three components. If the system of these three components is balanced, the team works and the project works. Many problems are created by lack of communication, by lack of responsibility, by lack of action. And so problem solving, inclusion, and all the beautiful words we always use can't be applied if we don't think on an active communication, action, and responsibility. So many problems are created by lack of communication or by using the wrong tools. In theory, this system I described can take a number of widely theorized names. We can use design thinking. We have a lot of masters talking about it since 20 years. So participatory planning, co-design, we have a lot of theorized names, but in practice, the most important thing is that the actors who are part of the system, whether they are your team members or the project stakeholders, regardless of their origin, gender, age, religion, ethnicity, must work to create and maintain this balance. The diversity of the team, while it may initially be perceived as a complication, a noise, a difficulty, is actually its greatest strength. I can assure you, by including professionals with skills different from our own and with different backgrounds and history, we can achieve a much broader view of things and achieve projects and outputs. Diversity and inclusion enrich the system because they enrich the supply of skills, ideas, and therefore technical solution. To give you a practical example, I'm currently the team leader of 2 slum upgrading projects in Djibouti. And I sat last week at the same table, the directors and engineers, they are engineers, okay, of the Ministry of Urban Planning, with our sociologist, who is from Mali, our infrastructure engineer that is coming from Tunisia, 2 urban planners coming from Senegal, our local lawyer from Djibouti, and my Italian team. It was very complicated to coordinate this discussion, to listen to everyone. I can assure you, I was very tired at the end, but some key principle emerged that will hopefully be adopted from now on for the upgrading of all the city informal neighborhood in Djibouti. So the success is the result of a highly inclusive design thinking process and of an extremely diverse team. Perhaps working alone and with people who look like us and who we can understand immediately is easier. It's easier for me to dialogue and to work with the architects graduated from Rome in Italy. It's easier because it's more difficult to set up a system of listening, dialogue, and communication. But when this system succeeds, it is incredibly powerful. Believe me, if a balanced system of communication, responsibility, and action is achieved, the power of design thinking is enormous. It can deal with extremely complex projects and situations, such as those we are experiencing in this stage and age of uncertainty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elise. We've got James back. Welcome back, James. Just when I lost you,
Yes.
my question to you is, beyond your opening remarks, could you give us a bit of a view from the developing world on this topic?
Is James still with us, or is he frozen again?
I see it's not frozen. James, can you hear us?
I can hear you. It's quite bad.
Well, can you, James, can you switch off your video? At least your bandwidth will be much better, okay?
Yeah, I can do that.
That's right. Okay.
I didn't get the full question, but maybe some of my earlier comment, one in particular, that we engineers now have to not only listen to the diverse voices, more importantly, also go out of our way to engineer biases and discrimination out of projects. That means that you make a conscious effort to remove what can be seen to be a disadvantage to a certain group, etc. And I think that is extremely possible. Otherwise, all I can say with a light touch is that we can see that even technology is diverse. It keeps having me in and out. That is the kind of unwarranted diversity, but we just appreciate the world we live in. So Michelle, you could ask your question now.
James, what is the point of view on this topic regarding the developing countries?
Very good question, because as the name alludes, developing countries, it means that they are still not where the other countries are. And perhaps to say that the developing countries have got certain challenges that are peculiar with them. One is that they're still perhaps at a stage of development that is not quite up to par with the others. Secondly, they have resources. So you will find that the governments and other providing infrastructure tend to go for the urgent need of infrastructure and also doing it in a presumably cost-effective manner because they have limited funds. That means that the conversation inclusivity, diversity tends to be lost in the urgency of executing what I would call the bare minimum infrastructure to bring development. And it's unfortunate, but I think what we are seeing, global pressure is being put on governments, even in the developing countries, to start people who live in these countries who are unique in their own form, is different from the other, are beginning to put pressure on government as democracy is being embraced more and more. So it is a topic that is still young. It is a topic that is growing momentum. And what we can do as engineers is not to wait until it is fully embraced, but to start embracing it, to have this proactive stand, to embrace it, to bring on board these important different inputs, different needs, so that by the time we develop the infrastructure, it is infrastructure that will be in posterity. It will have taken into account the peculiar needs, and in so doing, make that infrastructure more effective. Back to you, Michelle.
Thanks, James. So in our promotional material, you would have seen we were supposed to be joined by two additional ladies, Sabrina and Vera. Unfortunately, due to flight delays, Vera is currently in the air and won't be able to join us, as you can see. And unfortunately, Sabrina was lost to us right before the webinar. So apologies that we can't have these two speakers. Who we do also have roped up in the last minute. So thank you, Daduna. If you don't mind just bringing your comments as well. Daduna is part of the FIDIC family as well, and she's been so gracious in bringing her point of view with the loss of our other two speakers. Thanks, Daduna.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Hello to everybody. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. It is a pleasure to be joining this diverse webinar, and I believe that we have participants attending from all over the world, and we have inclusion and diversity to this webinar. The topic is very interesting, and I believe that we all agree that achieving the objective of diversity and inclusion is only bringing success for us, everybody. So we should be achieving to make sure our objective should really be to achieve inclusion and diversity. I'm not an engineer, so when I think about designing the thinking, how to increase diversity and inclusion, for me as a lawyer, first comes to really ask the right questions, and then starting to answer those questions, what our objectives could be. So in this regards, I think that the main questions for me would be, to say, how do we, in our everyday activities, how do we take action in order to increase diversity and inclusion? How do we monitor that we have done enough? Where do we take action? Is it a recommendation that we make? Is it a soft rule or is it a hard rule? Do we make the recommendations or policies in the documents? And it's really about thinking then to really welcome the diversity so that everyone is heard. And as James mentioned, really creating the environment that the diversity is welcome. I think these are the main questions that we should be asking. For example, in FIDIC, we do ask those questions when it comes to the composition of the board, to the composition of the committee. And do we have diversity? Do we have the gender? Do we have the regions? Or what we can really do to reach out to more? And how do we listen to these different opinions and listen to the diverse teams? So I think this is the view that I can express at the moment, and then back to you, Michelle.
Thanks so much. So after those comments, we just quickly want to do a poll. So we implore that all the attendees, please, if you can add your opinion to the poll. Do you believe diversity and inclusion can influence your revenue? Yes, no, or unsure? So your honest opinion is much appreciated. Again, we will take your responses back to the committee to see how and what more do we need to do regarding research, specified research, localized research, regional research to be able to support the FIDIC member associations. We'll give it a bit more time. And I think everybody's able to submit. I think we can go over to questions. Okay, if we can look at it. Oh, fantastic. We have an 84% response to say you believe that diversity and inclusion can influence your revenue. I'm delighted to see this response. Only 3% no and 14% unsure. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, we would have had you convinced. But if you're someone who likes hard data, we will certainly make sure we get as much data for you as possible. Thank you so much for the poll. Okay, so just a couple of introductory remarks before we go over to the questions. I would like to say that even from my personal point of view, I've been lucky enough to work in extremely complex processes in water and wastewater treatment. And you can imagine from my point of view, the more inputs I have when it comes to process design, especially, the better the product I have in the end. So I'm obviously sold on design thinking, and it doesn't have to be difficult. You can have an end in mind and you just need to work towards that. So Nelson, I see you up on the screen there. Can I maybe jump in and ask a question from yourself and how I believe you used design thinking to develop the diversity and inclusion in the committees and the board?
Thank you very much, Michelle. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Are you?
Yes. Yes.
Well, I mean, I think Doduna alluded to the journey that we've traveled in the last 2.5 or call it 3 years. First of all, I think, if I pick up what's been said, you've used the design analogy into whether it's building or infrastructure or system. When you need to have an output, you then have to design the input into it, and then you use your cocktail, and then you make sure when you mix it together, the output is what you want. And if it doesn't come out to be what you want, then you change the input until you get the balance that you want. So let me bring that back to reality. If you remember, not too long ago, I came into FIDIC and there was only one lady at the board of FIDIC. And we had a shock horror on our way out to suddenly realize that if we didn't do anything strategic, and if we didn't change the ethos of FIDIC and fundamentally change the design input, then we are not going to get the output that we wanted. And if you do remember, in the middle of that COVID, we had to go back into our statute and bylaw. And from the point of view of governance of FIDIC, that is your design input. You looked into your statute and bylaw and said, what does the current statute and bylaw says? And does it address the issue of diversity and inclusiveness? If we are meant to be an organization that represents 102 countries in 6 or 7 continents, does that reflect in our day-to-day activity? And if the answer is no, then we have a job to do, which is to redesign the input. I hope you can hear me. And what we did exactly was to redesign that. So we took the statute and bylaw apart. We got our governance committee led by Tony Barry, who is the current president. And we ask ourselves serious question. What do we need to change in the statute and bylaw to make sure that, you know, when we have that statute and bylaw approved at the General Assembly and then implemented, then we can have the result that we wanted? And the answer was very simple. Now I go back into the point that Elisa talked about. She talked about, you know, you need to have an effective communication. She talked about being accountable, and she also talked about taking action. So let me take those 3 points. So in the communication, we made a change to the statute and bylaw. We communicate that to all our member associations. We effectively say to them, we need to make this change. Otherwise, we can talk about diversity and inclusion, but we are not practicing what we preach. And taking that to the statute and bylaw and going for the General Assembly, we got the message and we got the statute and bylaw to be changed. So that's the first point of principle on policy that you have to do. Now, in your design idea, you may then talk about what is the design standard. So I relate that changes to the statute and bylaw to be the same thing as saying getting the specification right. If you get the spec right, then it's much easier for you to make sure you get the right bit to make the building work. So we got the statute and bylaw. The next point, which goes back to the Lisa, we communicated to all our member associations to say, we now have a new statute and bylaw, and we've checked ourselves now. And we know for sure that we are not diverse, and we are not inclusive, and we need to be sure that we are diverse and inclusive. So the next round of the appointment of the board, we went out and communicated to all our member associations. We said, we are not, but we do believe there is a gap. There is a gap in Africa, there's a gap in Asia. We are being specific in our input, and we specify that, and we actually rally around our industry and say, we need to make a change so that when people vote, they can actually address that gap. And guess what? We did got that message through. People listen, and then they actually do that. So that's us being accountable as a board to make sure that not only do we have the specification designed very well, but we actually take responsibility. And then the next point that was mentioned was taking action. So we took action to say, okay, fine, we've addressed that at the board level, but what about the other constituent of FIDIC? In terms of what we do, how do we make sure that we engage at the region? How do we make sure that in our committee, how do we make sure we engage that? We then start to look at the terms of reference for our committees. We revamp that, we change the specification, and we had it agenda in there that all our committee must have at least an element of diversity in that. And that diversity is not just about gender only, but regional diversity. Again, we went through the whole of 10 committee, and we religiously, if I can use that word, religiously went through that. Now, this is the point of accountability. We have board member assigned to each of our committee, and we said to the board member, before you recommend people to be a member of the task force, you must be happy that you've addressed this issue about diversity. So every time candidates are being put forward, we're absolutely sure that we address the issue of gender and diversity in terms of geography. And believe it or not, James can tell you, when we put candidate forward, or the list of candidates for committee role, the latest one is to do with digital transformation, which is coming up. It went through to the board, and some board members said, this is not acceptable. We haven't got female in it. We haven't got this geography in it. Again, this is about being accountable. And somebody at the board took that responsibility. So Michelle, with that in mind, you can see the journey that we've traveled within the board, within the committee, and gradually in our geographical outlook. So we now have a regular dialogue with our Latin America, with our North American grouping, with our European colleagues, with our African colleagues, and our Indian and Sub-Asia. So I believe if you actually go through those 3 steps that Elisa talked about, which is really, I mean, one point that she didn't talk about, it was about, setting the policy. I call that the standard. Set the policy, then you have to communicate, make somebody accountable, and when they're accountable, check it and make sure we deliver. Now, the check it for me in building and properties and infrastructure, if we have an infrastructure that we are giving a clear input to it, if it doesn't get performed and it doesn't deliver, Michelle, you know what happened? The client will not accept that infrastructure, they will reject it. That's exactly what we are doing in our process. If we get to a point that where we are putting a staffing of a committee together or the board together, we should be bold enough not only to say we are emotionally driven. In fact, a lot of the points you raised, Michelle, to say gender diversity and inclusion is not a human resources challenge. It's just a way of doing business. Because if you do it right, you find that you get a complementary blend of talent coming together in your thinking, in your action, in your deliberation, to the extent you get the best of both worlds. Because in FIDIC, we are representing the globe, not one group or another group. And therefore, it's absolutely imperative that everything we do, and I can be honest, under my leadership, have to go through that process. So I believe that that approach that we've taken is beginning to penetrate through. I am pleased with the progress. We set a target at the board of 33%. We've achieved that. I would love to see more female coming to the board this year. And that's a challenge for the world for us to see. Now, I say, if you have to preach something, you have to practice it. Under my rule, under my support and leadership, I need to be seen that FIDIC is not just talking about it, but we are doing it. And we are doing it, and it's evidence, and that has to translate. Because unless we do that, Michelle, we cannot attract the young people to come into our profession. Unless we do that, we cannot make our industry profitable. Unless we do that, we cannot make our industry productivity. Unless we do that, we are not going to attract the next generation. That's my take for you. And I think we've still got a long way to go. Thank you very much. Hand over back to you.
Thanks so much, Nelson. And leading with the discussion around talent, I want to ask James as a CEO and Elisa as a project manager, how do we attract talent, diverse talent into our companies, James, and into our teams, Elisa? James?
Thank you. I think for you to attract talent, then you have to be deliberate in your recruitment process and the requirement of talent. And indeed, during the process of recruitment, you must be able to accommodate the cost of diversity in some instances, because there could be groups that perhaps needs to be supported so that they can come up to speed with the others. But it's got to be a deliberate effort, as I say, primarily because once you do that, then and people see the value of having that diversity, and then you start seeing the value, and as you mentioned previously, it has an effect on the bottom line. The solutions that you craft, the solutions that you put together will be much more endearing to the consumers and to the owners, etc. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, to expect that you recruit people at the same levels is not necessarily going to be correct. So you have to be deliberate in inculcating and bringing on board diversity. And just like Dr. Nelson has said, even within the board and the committees, it's a deliberate effort to bring on board different talent to include that diversity. And to me, what I can say is that I have seen drastic change in the level of inclusivity in the university classes. Not enough, but certainly starting with gender, starting with people with special needs, we continue to see engineers of good level of diversity. It is not yet enough, but certainly by giving them room, people are able to accept them and to see, yes, they're as good as anybody else. And therefore, I also think that rather than leaving it to discretion, companies and firms should also adopt policies that will help define that road, achieve that road, etc. The one thing that I must also say here, because I know many of the participants are likely to be members of a professional organization, is to see what FIDIC has done in terms of having policies, and that very important policy that Michelle, you talked about. It's no good having a professional membership organization and then you don't have policies to guide your actions, to bring in a level playing field, etc. And I must say that my life in FIDIC has always been much easier because direction, alignment, comes in early, and people are allowed to contribute. And what I would say is that as our participants go to their own professional firms, this is something that they can certainly borrow without any shame, and embrace it and even make it better. That's what I would have to say, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisa?
Thank you, Michelle. So how to attract talent? Maybe, as Nelson was saying, also by defining well the TOR. So it's important that the terms of reference are as much as innovative, inclusive, and visionary as you can. So you can attract them and give them the opportunity to appear. But for me, the challenge is not to attract. The challenge is mainly to keep them engaged in a project. It's very important how to keep them engaged. So for me, coming back to the system I described, is communication. It's a key, and the engagement of each component of a team, it's a key. So you need to listen always, and to improve and to create space for their creativity to express, because we are creative people, engineers, architects, we work in projects. We need to leave the floor to expression also. And this is the way with this inclusive approach also to creativity and to ideas that we need to act, because talents normally are creative people, and if they don't find the space, they will leave. And so if they leave, the projects also will be weak. So it's important to give them the opportunity to appear by defining good TOR, resuming, and give them the opportunity to stay by listening them and by creating the enabling environment for their creativity to express, I think. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elisa. So I'm coming back to Deduna, alluding to one of the questions regarding the conditions of contract, but to expand a bit on that question, is there a role for contracts or the procurement process to encourage diversity? Deduna, your point of view?
Michelle, thank you for this question. I think it's an organizational or corporate matter, and the policy to increase the diversity. You can't, I'm not sure you can't say that the particular team member should be one gender or the other contractually, because that could, again, in my view, be against diversity and inclusion. So what diversity and inclusion means to me is really opening the door to anyone. And if you bring that to contractual matter, it could be different. So, and just to also expand on what Nelson was saying, I think what was important is in increasing the diversity and inclusion is really building the foundation. For example, what FIDIC has done. The fact that it is now enriched in FIDIC statutes and bylaws, that it is the FIDIC objective to promote diversity, equal opportunity, and inclusiveness, that every terms of reference of the FIDIC committees, which is the foundation to build the committee, provides that the members of the committee shall reflect the diversity and inclusivity. It's really the foundation that gives an incentive then, and how it works in practice, gives an incentive to every task group or a committee, when they're building the new work, to look at that question and see that this is something we have to take on board. So I do really think it's more about the thinking and creating the foundation rather than making it an obligation. But of course, the objectives of, say, for example, we've seen in some, I think in some statutes and bylaws as well, to say that 40%, 60%, or like most of that could be an objective as well. And just reflecting on what Lisa mentioned, I think what is also important is, once you have the diversity and inclusiveness, is creating the welcoming environment and making sure that it is welcome and everyone is heard, and making the process enjoyable, so that promotes to then go beyond and say, okay, we want more because this brings the success.
Thank you so much, Taduna. We have a question for all the panel members. To increase diversity and inclusion, international firms should partner systematically, not only with local individuals, but mainly local engineering firms while operating in developing countries. What is your reaction to this, panel? So we'll start with, I see Nelson's hand is up. Go ahead, Nelson.
Michelle, maybe I can be bold on this. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me loud and clear? You can.
Yes.
Thank you. I think the issue about having inclusiveness of local competencies is absolutely important. You can only need to look at the sustainability development goals, and it sets out, the rules and what it is that makes a society's well-being. When I was in practice, I've been in a position where the client understands the need to make sure that you have what I call local content, because this is actually quite important, Michelle. I'm sure you recognize this. I've worked in different parts of developing countries, and I've worked in what is now known as advanced country. Either way, it doesn't matter. What matters mainly is about the policy that comes through from the client. If the client understands that it is good to have a sort of inclusiveness in the way the design is conceived and in the solution that's come together, then you are bound to get that in. So my experience in working in Indonesia and Philippines, in different parts of the world, is where the client said, I need to have an element of local content. Because if you think about it, it's not just because you bring the international design standard. Take your geology. Who has the best knowledge on your geology, which is the state of the ground and all the historical issues that is there? It's the local people. They have that expertise, who understand the local issue, the law, the planning process, and all of that. This is absolutely important. Now, we use the word in FIDIC about capacity building. But well, how can you go into a country where you have no knowledge of that country, you have no knowledge of the regulatory process, you have limited knowledge about your geological ground, apart from what you do on your desk study. You don't know where there's been earthquake or where there are issues, and you think you can have a solution which will be sustainable. The answer is no. So I'm a strong believer that when you work in international arena, it's absolutely imperative that you need to have local content into that. Now, a lot of banks, multilateral development bank, are actually making a condition that they say, as part of the capacity, that you must have local content. If you go into the oil and gas sector, I'm sure, Engineer James Mwangi may probably let you know, in the oil and gas sector, they are very strong about that, where they actually say 40% of the supply chain must be from local minimum. And that means that you can actually help with local capacity. You can help to build the capacity, and you can use local resources. I think this is a fundamental issue. Now, if I flip it back, and I look at my time working in United Kingdom, yeah, it isn't a developing country, but if I'm working for Birmingham City Council, which is middle of West Midland, and I come from Scotland, how would I have the knowledge of Birmingham if I don't employ people with Birmingham knowledge and Birmingham experience to do the work out there? Yes, you may have an international standard, but I'm a strong, passionate people. This is not a case of just developing country. It is the norm. You need to empower local people to make contribution into local solution. We talk about ecosystem, and we also talk about, the civic society. To me, I believe this is something the engineering should be an advocate of that. And FIDIC, by this nature, is an advocate. And if it's not written, Now we should have it had written in our policy, because you talk about the employment, and we should be advocating to client that where you need to procure a project is absolutely essential, that you must have local content into that. This is not just oil and gas sector. This is across the whole of infrastructure. So whether I'm working in Birmingham or London, or I'm working in Jakarta, or it doesn't matter, you need to have local content. I'm a strong advocate that we should do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm making the note. It's going in the policy. And I just want to add, it all comes back to design thinking, because if you think about it, all the people that you need to deliver a project, like you said, needs to have those diverse views and localized views as well. James, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I think Nelson has picked it very well, because when you asked the question on procurement, I was actually going to bring in that angle. And I was going to say that perhaps what we need to also think is, what's the cost of not having diversity, or the cost of not having inclusion in your design and ultimately the project execution process? I have seen projects that have been what you'd call dead on arrival, simply because there was little involvement. And little involvement means people don't understand what you're doing, and therefore their perceptions on what you're doing may tend to lean towards them feeling excluded. And like Nelson has said, the peculiarities of a country, the solutions that the country has that you can bring on board are important when you make sure that you bring in this local diversity. And in so doing, let people understand and embrace your project, so that your project doesn't face headwinds that ultimately can derail or become very costly. And therefore, one thing I can say is that we cannot shy from the fact that governments in the developing countries have had this deliberate effort of having local content. But it's not just in the execution, it's also in the conceptualization, which then brings the opportunity for the design thinking that will embrace each and every sector of our society. And in so doing, bring in a better product, better solution. So I'm excited to see that we in the developing countries can leapfrog processes and thinking, so that we can actually get closer to bringing these solutions earlier. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks so much, James. Elisa, your comments?
Thank you. No, I think it's very interesting what James was saying about not having diversity, what cost, what it means. It has a cost, because not having diversity means not being able to respond to diverse issues and diverse problematics. So, and as Nelson was saying, maybe not be able to respond to contents. So it's very important to be in the urban development projects. We always need to work in a partnership with local partner. It's very important. I work with local engineers, because I can't arrive in Djibouti, Cameroon, or wherever without the local knowledge. And it's not from me, the local knowledge. It's not my work. It's not my job. It's important, this mix between my own competence and local knowledge. So this diversity, the cost of not having diversity is maybe the cost of not reaching the scope, not delivering the right output, not having the client happy. So I think it's a key component, and capacity building, as Nelson was saying, it's also part of our job, because we are dealing, I think, but this is my personal point of view, that the job of architects and engineers is changing very fast. It's changing our present very fast. So we need to adapt our technology skills, we need to adapt our language skills, because I need to speak in 4 or 5 languages normally to deal with different situations. I need to work in different teams, platforms, different tools. So it's important to be a diverse team And I come back with the Daduna question also, how to do it in practice. We need to work both in teams and projects. So to improve diversity also in our small home area, and to understand that having this diversity is the key to deal with this changing and unstable situation we are living. And after the pandemic, the situation is worse. So we need even more to be diverse and inclusive. Thanks.
Thanks, Elisa. Daduna?
A small comment I wanted to make, Michelle, with regard to the engaging the locals on the project and diversity. I think, and we spoke about creating the environment as well that can bring the diverse into the teams. I think a very good example for that is the translation of FIDIC contracts, for example, that really helps to maybe overcome the language barrier as well, that could possibly stand against bringing the diversity. So when you have more language capabilities, that's one of the examples, as I could see, where you could really create the environment that you have more professionals involved that otherwise could maybe not be able to be engaged. So I think that more thinking in this direction, what environment can we create in each team? That's just an example, but in each team, what do we need to do to make sure that the engagement is possible once the professionals or the talent are on board.
Before I let you go, a question from the audience again. How can legislation support us? As a lawyer, if you want to comment on that.
Oh, that's a big question. That's a big question, but I mean, I think my answer, I mean, it could be looked in many. There is a legislation, of course, in many different areas that is covering, and I think my answer would there be, without too much thought, is again creating the foundation, giving the incentives, and then building on those incentives could be a good starting point for the legislation to address that issue.
Thanks. I just want to add a comment. In my country, South Africa, legislation has been used quite successfully in implementing diversity and inclusion, and I just want to give credit to my government to say a lot has moved in our country to move this forward. Okay, and then another comment from the crowd. I was reading an interesting article from HBR on reverse innovation and where innovations are created in developing countries and then rolled out to developed countries, which allows for leapfrogging for innovation to be fit for purpose, not scaled down to budget. So that's quite an interesting question. And what are our views on this? Any of the panel members wanting to take that one?
Could you just say that again?
Okay. I was reading an interesting article from HBR on reverse innovation, where innovations are created in the developing countries and then rolled out to developed countries, which allows for leapfrogging of innovation to be fit for purpose, not scaled down due to budget. What are your views on this? That's such an interesting one.
Michelle,
go ahead, Nelson.
Okay. I mean, the concept that the developing country will invent something that will then become something that will be adopted in developed country, that's the point you're trying to say. Well, as you probably know, I have a Nigerian heritage, and I'm glad that you have South African heritage. And we've got, you know, James, who is somewhere between South Africa and Nigeria, and actually, you know, I'm based in UK. But I mean, let's look at, you know, the telecommunication sector, okay? This is one thing that is just opened the bandwidth of the world. Because, you know, close to where I am here in Geneva is a place called CERN, where the www was discovered not too long ago. And you only need to wind the world back now. I've got a son who is 27 years old, who does not understand what a floppy disk is, because he's 27 years old. It doesn't understand what a floppy disk is. And I got plenty of floppy disk in my garage, which I was asking him, he said, Daddy, I don't know what it is. Now, the point I'm trying to bring into that is that we've seen innovation coming through in different parts of pattern. And people always believe innovation comes from the advanced society, but that's not true. That is not true. You now find that in some part of Africa, there is an entrepreneur initiative that coming through that you can do micro banking that allows people in the village to be able to do transaction at a cost-effective way. This morning, I was watching BBC World News, and there is a transactional platform that you can do in a deep, deep down of India, does not need Wi-Fi, with a little tiny microphone. Now, it's easy for us to stay in the Western society and think we have it all. The truth of the matter is, out of the challenges of the emerging market will come innovative and creative thinking. So yes, the review by Harvard Business School is not new. We know what Harvard Business School talked about all the time. My take on it is that creativity will come from emerging country. And actually, a lot of people are looking at it. But actually, when you look at some of this technology, let me ask you a simple question. The iPhone, if you have one, you ask yourself, where is the best material come out of iPhone? It comes from Africa. Where is the design being done? In China. And who uses most in the West? You start looking at other product that is coming through. I do not believe that all the innovation have to come from the West. I think there is a lot of fantastic innovation coming out of Africa, from Middle East, from Asia, that is going to leapfrog the way things are done. Because traditional approach in the West is that you take a linear approach for growth. And what you see, if you take the African case, the banking sector has leapfrog. I have a bank account, and I'm quite happy to say that is operating in Nigeria, and I can transact where I'm here. Now, you cannot transact a UK account overseas that way. That is a technology that was discovered through Africa and works everywhere. And I'm actually quite a strong believer that in our infrastructure sector, let's be on the lookout. There will be some smart thinker coming out of the young one. And that takes me to the one point we haven't talked about the youth. The youth are such a powerful people that we need to embrace. We have in FIDIC, the future leader. I think one of the points that I was expecting James Mwangi to talk about is how does company ensure that the young people who are coming up with creative thinking are engaged very early on? Because, Michelle, the attention span is very short. If they don't see the opportunity for growth, for them to make their way in the company, they will leave. Because the point that was raised by Elisa earlier on is about acquisition of talent is one thing, retention of talent is another one. So we need to bring it together, both the acquisition and retention, because these young people, not me, I'm sorry, Michelle, not you, not James, are going to create the new product. The young one are going to create new product, and the earliest we harness them at senior level and give them opportunity, the better. So I do believe strongly that this innovation and creativity and all the new ideas coming up is going to come from different parts of the world, and the rest of the world will have to wake up to it. So there is a challenge there, and we need to embrace that. And let me be honest with you, we are pretty conservative in our sector. We are very conservative in our sector. We don't often embrace the young one. And now I'm learning from my children. They're teaching me about Bitcoin. They're teaching me about cryptocurrency. And they're telling me about that, there's going to be innovative contract where transacting is going to be seamless and all the claims on dispute is going to disappear because all the transaction will be available on, what I call Bitcoin. This is the way the world is going. I cannot hack it. So we need to embrace this young one. So thank you very much. I hope I've got my play on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson. I think you were referring to blockchain. I think that's the one that could look at transactions.
Absolutely,
yes.
It is blockchain. It is blockchain, yes.
All together with that.
Yeah.
James, did you want to add something to that? I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, just an earlier comment. And firstly, let me say I agree with Nelson. I'm also from that school of thought that is now having to be receptive to new ideas. And I think they're helping us understand life better. But the point about legislation, and you mentioned it about your country, which is in Africa. And I believe that in certain parts of the world, especially the developing world, there has to be some structured mechanism to promote diversity, inclusion, etc. In other words, kind of affirmative action. And it cannot be left to discretion in many instances, because if you have it under discretion, there are many competing interests. A company wants to make money. That might not be their number one interest to have diversity, and sometimes may not tie too much value to it. So I was just going to say that I have seen the legislation coming, of course, guided by policy, which should be a participatory process, and in so doing have legislation. And then once you get to a certain level of development, then you can loosen legislation and then let things take their natural course. That's the comment I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, James. Elisa?
Yes, thank you. I would like just to add something about reverse innovation. And thank you, Nelson, for your intervention. You are the best innovator of FIDIC. It's very important, I think, to think about young people and innovation, because yes, it's a conservative sector, engineering, also architecture. So it's important to think, to have a vision on that. So I just would like to share my experience on that, because reverse innovation, I think it's very important and crucial also for inclusion and diversity. And just to give you a practical example, I went to do my PhD on urban regeneration in Latin America. I am from Rome, I'm Italian, so you can say, okay, your university in Italy but Sapienza University is a very good one. But I went to Latin America because looking at studying, I understood that there they were acting and doing slum upgrading in a very, very good way. So I went to study there, and I continued studying in Latin America and Africa, and from developing countries mainly, to then improve also my reality in Rome. So what we do, for example, there is we call it tactical urbanism. I don't know if you heard about it. Tactical urbanism is to intervene with small and low budget intervention in complicated areas of the cities. So it's urban regeneration at the small scale, with a small budget, with a strong community engagement and a strong social impact. This is not from my country, and they are applying it, for example, in Milan or in France or everywhere in Europe now after COVID. And okay, now we apply tactical urbanism, but it's not a product of Milan, a product of Rome. It's a product from Latin America. It's a product from Africa. It's a product from many other cultures where there is the culture to improve and to be to find creative solution for urban problems. So I think this is very interesting comments and very interesting question from our audience, and a very important also example, like we can do it as urban planner, engineers, try to understand this mechanism of reverse innovation, because lessons are always an exchange from continents and from countries. So diversity can improve it. Thanks.
Elise, before I let you go, talking about young professionals and so on, how has the pandemic or post-pandemic landscape changed anything for the young professionals?
I think there is maybe an opportunity for young professionals to rewrite, so to redesign a lot of strategies. So I see in the positive way that we have to redesign cities, we have to redesign approaches. So there is a space to invent. So there is a space for creativity. And I hope young engineers and young architects will do it.
I must say, from my view, the advent of Microsoft Teams and Zoom, it's been fantastic. I can take any young engineer into any meeting and it won't cost me any money. So coming from diversity and inclusion, there's no more excuses for non-inclusion of young people out there. So, and of course, very good for training. James, I see you nodding your head. You want to add to that? James?
Yeah,
There we
yes.
go.
In fact, the young people showed us that that it is easy to use technology. And what the young people also taught us is that there are no barriers. You know, there's no barrier in terms of time. They can work anytime. And then they are so globally connected. They can work from home for anybody, anywhere in this in the world. And to me, they embraced it very quickly. They don't have hang-ups on certain working practices. And I thought that is excellent. And therefore, coming back to Nelson's point on the youth, if there's one group we must make sure they are included all along, it is that group called the youth. And to me, there are some very, very important statistics that make us know that we must include them. And that is the statistic of unemployment. Because coming out of school and not having something to do doesn't give you a lot of peace, irrespective of who you are. And to me, they have energy, they have the agility, they're willing to learn, and I think they must be accommodated. So what you're saying, Michelle, tagging along with them, allowing them to try something because they're not inhibited in their thinking is certainly very, very important. And I would like to say that in our part of the world, we have a big challenge and we are going to be part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe James, if I can stay with you, why do you think there aren't enough women and ethnic minorities on the top of our industry?
Well, good question. We have cultural, can I say cultural hangover, cultural baggage that has seen us not fully embrace. Many cultures in the developing world had distinct roles for the genders and age groups. And that is something that we are still trying to evolve out of. And therefore, you'll find that when it comes to opportunities being given, there is a certain bias of those opportunities still left and being dominated, for example, by males. But I'll tell you this, I have seen more and more women take up very, very major roles. The fact that recently in the neighboring country, Tanzania, we have a lady president who, in my view so far, is doing well. And she has been embraced. I think that's a very positive step. And it is also going to see the girl child empowered to believe that they can. And you know, as a father of 2 daughters and 1 son, they must be empowered. That's where I come from in terms of the thinking. And the business membership organizations, again, we are seeing much more active participation. Even in engineering organizations, we are seeing much more participation, and they are proving that they can balance the delicate life of professional life, family life, and also spousal life. And I think that is incredible. I must say, I don't know how they do it, but they do it well. Thank you.
It takes a village, James. It takes a village.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nelson, I see you have a comment as well.
Yes, I hope you can hear me loud and clear. I mean, the question you raised, why is it that we haven't got enough female people from ethnic minority in position of authority in our industry? You can only harvest what is there. And we don't have enough right now. That's quite fundamental. So we have a big challenge. We have a big challenge, and that big challenge comes back to the point we talk about setting the principle, and the principle is being built up in there. I think, you know, if you go around the world now, the biggest consulting engineering world is called AECON. The CEO is Laura Paloni. She's Italian descendant, she's an Australian, and she's managing 90,000. If you go to KPMG, the lady that's running the Netherlands side, she used to run Arcadis, and she's a lady, and she's in a very key position. If you go across into what I call, you know, Sweden, There's a company which is called, which will have Axel Bachmann, and that's Sweco. That is run by a lady, and that's about 14,000 people. So we are beginning to see changes. But you may ask the question, where do you see the ethnic minority fit into that? That is beginning to change. Let's start for a start. I think FIDIC is bold enough to appoint me. That's the first one that they've done. Secondly, we had Aisha Nadar, who was a board member. And now you got Catherine, who is not ethnic minority, but if you ask her, she will tell you that she's got, what I call, Greek background and Canadian descendant, and she's a vice president. So we are moving in the right direction, but not fast enough. And how can we make that different? I think it starts from issue. We need to encourage young ones to actually have experience of board and leadership. And it doesn't matter whether you are female or you are ethnic minority. We need to encourage them in the early phase. We talked about mentoring. Actually, they could do mentoring to us. I call it reverse mentoring, to get them to be involved with the board, to share their view, and to help us on this technology issue. They're so vast, as James said. And this is not about just ethnic minority, just the young one. I'm really gunning for the young one. Let's get them early into the system. Let them understand the system, because they take responsibility very quickly. Let them understand the system. Let's create a pathway for them, for us to be able to mentor them, to have people in our industry said, I've got few people that I'm mentoring. I have one confession. I have up to 50 young people in United Kingdom that I'm mentoring right now. I started about 20 years ago. And initially it was Black and ethnic minority of people who didn't know what they wanted to do. I encouraged them into engineering, and some of them went from A level to get PhD. And then it got to a point, my friends who happen to be white, they have their own children who didn't know where to go. So I took them on board. Now I've seen some of these people, they've now become senior position in various strands, and I still spend time to do that. And what I'm trying to say is that we have responsibility. We the one going, because we are past tense, okay? Even though we are still here, the one going. We have a responsibility to anchor some of these young ones and mentor them, guide them in the process, so that when the opportunity comes up, they can rise to the challenge of taking key position. And believe it or not, the future doesn't see color. The future doesn't see age. The future doesn't see ethnicity. The future is about those who can offer. And as James said, the young one has a lot to offer, and we must encourage them. And we, as FIDIC, have a responsibility by getting the future leader to come to our board, to experience the board, and to know exactly what happened. And I want to encourage more of the future leader to put themselves forward for board position. Okay, be bold enough. We got Chantel, who put themselves forward in a board position. That's how they can learn through the process. If they can learn that process, then the challenge is on companies, individual companies, to make sure they have people, they call it rising star, and they encourage them to cut through the pathway. So we can cut through the old way of thinking and get into the new way of thinking, which is the new world. Get them young. That's the trick. Get them as quickly as you can. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much for that. So we're going to end the questions here and go to our next poll. And Nelson, you're gonna enjoy this poll because it might speak to your closing discussion. Do you believe diversity and inclusion training can assist your company? Yes, no, or unsure? And I'm sure Nelson will be able to maybe segue into the FIDIC Academy from there. Do you believe diversity and inclusion training can assist your company? Yes, no, and unsure. And if you're asking yourself, what is diversity and inclusion training right now, we don't want to put that too much in a box. And we welcome your comments after this webinar to say, if your answer was yes, what type of training, diversity and inclusion training, would you be interested in? Obviously, we have our ideas, but it's always good to ask all the stakeholders, and we have many of them here today. Great. If we can see the results of our poll. Wow. Wow, you've been a fantastic audience. I must tell you, you've been singing to my heart today. Thank you so much. 93% zero no and 7% unsure. Thank you so much to each of our speakers from my side, from the Diversity and Inclusion Council. And thank you so much to the Duna for coming on in short notice, and Nelson to support us as well on short notice. I appreciate you all so much, and to the participants as well. Thank you so much for your questions. We'll have feedback on LinkedIn about the session and more information that you can take from there. Over to you, Nelson.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle, for leading us through this particular issue. I want to say a massive thank you to you as the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council. It's no longer a committee, it's the Advisory Council to the board. This is part of the constitutional change. It is an advisory council to the board, which means the board can call upon you to advise us on what changes we need to make so that we are fit for the future. So I'm really pleased, Michelle, that you continue to lead us this way. I'm extremely grateful for Elisa and for Doduna, and also James for giving us his leadership, both as a board member, but also as a CEO of his own company, with the experience that he brings to bear, and both of them add on. Let me just pick up some of the key points that's picked up in. I started by talking about the issue we had to deal with, which is about COVID last year. And now we are talking about, what is happening in Ukraine. Our hearts and soul are still with those people in Ukraine. And FIDIC is going to get the 7-point action plan, which I'll be communicating to our members to make sure that at least we rally around, we support our Ukrainian people, that we actually, support those people who are affected, and we do the right thing for them. We have that responsibility. That's the part of the society that we live in. But actually, it was quite interesting to see, the way James started to ask the question from the design concept, which, pick up. Unfortunately, he was disjointed because of technology, but I think I picked the main thrust of his conversation, which means that, we need to instill this in our process. And Michelle, you came in with your introduction to set the scene, and you look at the design principle as an approach. And I reversed that to say, take the statute and take the bylaw, make the changes, and then look at the action and see how action translates. But more important, that we need to talk about accountability. This is one point that hasn't actually come. Leadership is very critical, because in all that we talked about, to make the changes to FIDIC statute and bylaw, to put local content as a procurement issue, to make sure that there is local empowerment, it comes down to leadership. Somebody must have the vision and the leadership to make this thing happen. I will go with the point that was said by, Elisa. I still take those 3 points as, absolutely sacrosanct in all that we saw. Yes, change the policy, but if you change the policy and you don't communicate, it's not going to happen. It will not happen. This is Andy Walker's phrase. He said, it doesn't matter what you do it so well, but you don't communicate it. It didn't happen. Nobody gets to know about it. I'm sure Mr. Walker is listening, and I have no problem in quoting him, but that's his catchphrase. He said, if you do something and it's advocacy and you're successful about it, you don't tell people about it, it doesn't work. So the second point that Lisa talked about is accountability. Somebody must be accountable and to stand to deliver. And this is important. And then the third one is action. I take those 3 points. Everything seems to fit into that. What does that mean? In the whole idea of using design as a concept to achieve diversity and inclusion means that we've got to look at the fundamental issue. What is wrong in our society? And how can we enshrine that in the goal principle of what is right or what is wrong? And how do we make sure we put that out? And we talk about, how do we put that into employment? How do we put it in the procurement? How do we make sure the young one gets involved? All these are absolutely critical. And my takeaway, if I can actually leave it with you, my takeaway from the conversation is that acquisition of talent is one thing, but retention is equally important. And it's very important that we need to look at engagement and listen, which is very important. I hear that word. We need to be adaptable. We need to be open-minded, and we need to be inclusive. This is absolutely critical that I picked up. We talk about mentoring, but I also turn it around and say we need to look at reverse mentoring. How can we learn from the young one to help us to shape the future? We talk about the procurement process. Yes, we can build it in the contract process, but if we don't have the leadership to enforce it, it ain't gonna happen. So I then take the point that we looked at, the creating enabling environment is critical. So whether you are in a company, you are in a society, you are in a community, if you create the enabling environment, in other words, we talk about the social value of diversity and inclusion, and you can see the benefit. It impacts positively on your productivity, it impacts positively on your profitability, it impacts positively on creativity. If we accepted those fundamentals, and today is International Women's Day, then we have an opportunity to make a big change. On that note, I want to thank you once again. Yes, we have quite a lot of items coming up. There's the State of the World webinar, which is coming up next time. We have committee webinar again, which is coming up. There's contract webinars coming up. We have a contract users conference, which is about to start in May. We have another one coming for America, for Asia Pacific. We have global conference this year. We are trying to put that together and make sure that happens in Geneva. So all our committee and all our community, wherever you are, put the date in your diary, 11 to 13 September, have it on. And then we have the London conference coming through. So with that in mind, I want to thank everybody behind the scene. Liz, who's just joined us, Barbara is on maternity leave, and Nadia and Chanel, and also Andy and others who are supporting us. Thank you very much for all that you are doing to make sure that we are still on air. With that in mind, I'd like to finish. Wherever you are, stay safe. God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.